Well, those were a couple of powerful songs related to the power of God and our ability to rely on Him. And as we journey through this parenting series, remind me of the Great Commission when Jesus said, "Go into all the world and preach the gospel, making disciples of all nations." And then He closes that Great Commission, by saying, "And lo, I am with you always." That God promises to be with us. And sometimes in the journey of parenting, it's possible that you'll go through a stretch of time when your only confidence, your only assurance is recognizing that God is with you, and trusting that God is there, even maybe when it seems like He is absent. And next week I'm going to be talking about how do we parent through times when we're facing obstacles, when we're facing adversity, and maybe when our dreams turn to heartache. We're going to focus on that next week. Hey, just one more comment on Thanksgiving. Joint Tom Archibald did a cool thing in the kids area. The kids mostly put this together. There's a wall of Thanksgiving with some leaves that people have written down, mostly kids, things that they're thankful for. And as we're talking about practices and disciplines today, I thought, wow, that could be a cool family discipline to have a wall of Thanksgiving, maybe during the whole month of November or something like that. It's pretty cool. You should check it out. I was looking at some of them. I saw one that someone had written on, "I'm thankful for my girlfriend." Now, I was hoping that wasn't a second grader, that was thankful for his girlfriend. But I know that some of us put some of those on there. But you have to check it out. It's a pretty cool thing. Well, we're continuing a series today entitled Parenting the Heroic Journey. That could be a movie, documentary. Parenting the Heroic Journey. And I just want to kind of at the outset say, this is the second week of the series, that no matter what age you are or how old your kids are, I think this series will be relevant for you. And even if you're not a parent, that we have an incredible role in mentoring children and young people. We believe as a community it's kind of all of our responsibility to do that. It has a dramatic impact on kids continuing to walk in the faith, that they know that there's other adults that care about them and care for them. So I think it has relevance to us all. Now, if you're a teenager here today, you might think, well, how about me? Or if you're in college, we have some of our college students back home. Well, you can be futuristic. You can kind of be thinking about your future, what your home might look like, or you could get an inside scoop into your parents' strategy and learn how to use it against them and in your favor. That would be another insight. Remind me, before I had a Kindle and could electronically underline things in books, I have this practice when I read a book, I always underline things, and I save those highlights of the book so I can go back to them. It's been a practice I've been doing for a long time. And there was a period of time I was paying my daughter Sarah. She's pretty competitive. I was paying her to do that for me, and sometimes I picked strategic books because I wanted her to read the highlights on them. And one time I had her underline for me a book called Yes. And it was basically a sales book, how to get someone to say yes to a sales pitch. And about 6 months later, she revealed to me that she had used that book against me 3 different occasions to get me to buy something for her. So it kind of backfired. So, if you're a teen or, adults, this could be helpful for you. You can kind of learn something here that could be to your advantage. So, parenting, the heroic journey. We have a survey on our Facebook page, our website. I would encourage you to take it. We'd like to get at least 100 responses. And we talked about one of the questions on that is, what is our dream, or what does success look like in parenting, or why is it a long-term commitment? And a few people wrote this about why parenting is a journey. One is that there are many ups and downs. Sometimes you have to take detours. Someone else wrote, you never know what is around the corner. So it's kind of like this adventurous journey because you don't know how it's necessarily always going to turn out. Someone wrote, every child is different, so that makes the journey more difficult. You kind of figure out how to navigate, and parent each child. Someone else wrote this, just when you think you have it figured out, your child transitioned into another season. They go from, preschool into elementary, and then it's like you're starting all over again, every time. It is a journey, and as I talked about last week, I think it's a longer journey maybe than it has been in the past, because technology has allowed us to stay more connected to our kids. So it kind of extends our parenting, maybe responsibilities a little bit, but certainly our ability to have an impact on our children over a long period of time. That probably was not true a generation, and certainly not true a couple of generations ago. We talked about why it's a heroic journey. It's because it's difficult. Just on the outset, when we start having children, there's sacrifice that is demanded. Kind of your whole world changes a little bit. That goes along, it should go along with parenting. Also, we know that our world is changing. And so if you're trying to raise up a child who is fully devoted to God, there's not much in our world that helps you out with that anymore. You've probably got to be a little unique. You're going to be a little different. Technology that allows us to be more connected to one another is also probably one of the most major threats because we're gatekeepers for our children. We're protectors, and it's hard for us to protect them. It's easy for us to protect their physical safety than it is for us to protect their hearts and minds. So technology has made it extremely difficult as parents. And then also because of the many opportunities that we have in parents for our kids to be involved in different things, creating boundaries. What do we say yes to? What do we say no to? What are the important things that are a part of our lives? So it is really an heroic journey that we embark on when we become parents. A couple of reflection questions from last week that we talked about. What is your dream? I'm going to talk about that a little bit more today. What is your plan, for raising up your children? What do you want in them? And what's your plan to make that happen? And we know that a lot of people, probably have a greater plan for retirement than they do for how to raise their kids or how to invest in their marriage, which is a tragedy. We should have a plan, some at least thought process of how we're going to make those relationships better. Another question that I threw in last week, and I think it's a relevant question, is if my child was like me, and this is assuming you're a follower of Christ and you want your kids to come and know Christ, is that if my child was like me, how would they say? What are 2 or 3 ways they would say that I'm most like Jesus? I think that's a good question, to think about, and I'm sure we all have an answer for that. What we talked about last week as we began the series is that as parents, we're the primary trainers or disciplers of our kids. Proverbs 22:6 says, "Train up a child in the way that he or she should go, and when they are old, they will not depart from it." I'm going to talk a little bit more about that passage next week and what it means. Is it an ultimate promise, or what does it mean? But certainly from a biblical perspective, parents are the primary disciplers, discipliners, of children. Our role as a church is to come alongside parents. We want to equip you. We want to encourage you. You might be a little bit weird, and we can be weird together, and trying to raise up fully devoted followers of Christ. And so one of the things we're doing is, next week is having a time of prayer. That's coming alongside an opportunity for families to connect together. Also inserted, or you should have received again this week, if you were here last week, you got one as well, a parent strategy kind of planning guide. And I would encourage you to take a look at this. And you might think, this is weird, kind of. And for most people, it is weird. Most people wouldn't even think about, putting something together like this, which is, in my perspective, somewhat a tragedy. But I would encourage you, even as I, present the message today and talk about the biblical perspective of parenting once again, that maybe just look at some of the questions. There's some great ones here. What are the values of your home? What are the qualities that you want in your children? What are the experiences that you would like them to have? Jane and I went through this last night. We took about an hour to go through it, and it was good to kind of reflect on some of the things that we think we've done the best at, maybe some things we could have done better, but we still play a role. And one of the powerful things that can come out of doing something like this is one slight change can make a dramatic difference in your life or in the life of your children. That's why it's important for us to spend time thinking about this, just kind of praying over it, asking God to help us. And I'm serious about this when I say one of the best gifts you might give your kids this Christmas is to take an hour or 2 away and think about what is our plan, what are we hoping to accomplish as parents. Again, that's a way that we can come alongside you. Parenting comes from a Latin phrase, means to bring forth. So what are we trying to bring forth in our children? What are we training them for? We know we're to train and to discipline them. What are we training them for? And if we take Jesus' greatest commandment as a lead, that we should love God with all of our heart, soul, mind, and strength, that we should love our neighbor as ourselves, we should be probably foremost training children to love. Training them to love God and to love others. We know that a lot is at stake when it comes to ministry to children and raising up followers of Christ. We know that if someone hasn't been exposed or experienced God in their life before the age of 18, it's a small chance that that's going to happen after that. It's about 6% come to Christ after the age of 18 if they've not been exposed to Christ in a powerful way before that. Some people would now say that that age is really closer to 13. So you can see what's at stake. And if you want to leave a legacy, for your life, you invest in people. And if you want to have the greatest return on your investment, you invest in the young, because they can have the power to change the world. And I believe that Satan knows that if he destroys the character, the hearts, and the minds of children, he wins the war. And the Apostle Paul tells us that we're engaged in a war. Now, you may not believe that. We don't talk about that a lot in our culture today, but we are engaged in a battle. We are engaged in a war. And so I want to commend you as parents for being here. I want to commend you for making worship a priority. That's a great point of emphasis, and to make that a priority in our lives. And one of the interesting things related to kids staying connected to God is that dads have a profound influence, that dads are connected and committed. Not to downplay the role of moms, but dads who are committed to God and being engaged in the church seem to have a profound impact, whether kids continue to stay engaged after high school and into college. Last week we looked at this passage from Psalm 127. Children are a heritage from the Lord. They are a reward from Him. Like arrows in the hands of a warrior are children born in one's youth. And one of the things we know is that the children are an incredible gift from God. If you've had the privilege of having children, that opportunity to hold that baby in your arms is one of the richest moments that you ever experience in your life. And so we recognize today that children are a gift from God, but there are responsibilities that come with that. And one of them is training our children for a life of love. So I want to talk about training and discipline today. I want to go back to the question, what is your dream? In the survey of some of those that responded so far, we answered the question, what is success, with these comments. Having children that are respectful and loving to others, love God, and are teachable. Confident kids that are God-centered in their decisions. Comfortable and confident in who God created them to be. This is a good one. When your kids are grown, they still want to be around you. That's good. We all hope for that. But there will be moments when they won't, right? And you have to be willing to endure those moments. That they would be kind, that they work hard, and love God and family. So even in these comments, from our online survey, again, if you would take time to do that, it only needs to take you a couple minutes, and pass that on. I want to encourage you to pass that survey on through social media. Because, and here's why I would say this, is because just encouraging someone to think about those questions can be life-changing for them. Because most people are not thinking about these questions. We're just kind of going through our lives without thinking about what we're doing. This passage in Psalm 127 has a powerful phrase that says that children are like arrows in the hands of a warrior. So there's kind of an imagery there of children being arrows, so they need to be directed, but also that they are weapons. Now, in a biblical sense, or in God's sense, they're not weapons of destruction. But in essence, our children be weapons of reconstruction, of reconciliation in the world today. So the goal of parenting, at least from a biblical perspective, is to raise children who make their faith in God and relationship with Him their highest priority in life, and proceed to live as intentional and devoted servants of God. Our mission is to influence culture. Jesus said to be salt and light. And Christians throughout the centuries have transformed culture, ending slavery, liberating women, creating hospitals, orphanages, and schools, leading in the front of transformation of culture. So when we think about what does it mean to raise children, at least from a biblical sense, it's not just about keeping our kids safe, but it's about sending them into the world to save the lives of others, be part of God's message and mission of reconciliation. It made me think about, one of the things that this made me think about is in our culture today, if we as a congregation had a few young people that went out and they did some different things, like which would we be more proud of? For example, maybe we had a young person who went out and was a really popular entertainer, making millions of dollars. Or maybe someone else went out and became a professional athlete. Or maybe someone else went out and they went as a missionary to a foreign country, put their lives in danger, and died as a martyr. And as I was thinking about this, the question came to my mind is, which of those young people would create more buzz in our congregation? Which would be more likely to talk about when we're kind of around the water cooler at work, when we're talking with friends? And I think part of the answer to that question will help us focus on what is it we are really trying to accomplish, and what are the dreams that we have for our kids? What are the greatest dreams? And in some ways, in our contemporary culture, we've done everything to make church easy. We have pretty short services, like an hour. In Vikings games, 3. We try to keep it pretty close hours. 75 minutes, by the way, is our window, so it's not long until it's 75 minutes. We try to keep short, and sometimes evangelism or discipleship or giving or serving is seen as something that's kind of optional. But other things in our culture are still difficult. For example, if you want to be the starting guard on your high school basketball team, it's going to take some work. You might have to spend every summer shooting 10,000 shots over and over again, and we know that it's difficult. It's just kind of interesting that we've tried to make following Jesus easy. And it's possible that what's happened from that, we've created a whole group of nominal Christians whose unchanged lives are uninspiring to people outside the faith. I think a lot of times we undersell Jesus. We make him, he's a friend. He's a means to an escape from hell. But we don't see him necessarily as all in all, as the one who breathes life into us, that without him that we're hopelessly lost. That when we enter into a relationship with God, we begin this adventurous journey, and that Jesus' invitation is to come to him, that he'll forgive our sins, and that he is renewing all of his creation. And he invites us on this journey to come along with him to renew all of mankind and all of creation together. Again, in the Great Commission, Jesus said, go into all the world and make disciples. And his promise there is that he would be with us, but it's a challenge to train and to make disciples. It is difficult, and it's part of the heroic journey in our world today. So again, I ask the question, what is your dream? What do you want your children to become? Because we never stop dreaming for our children. And no matter how old they are, I don't think we ever stop dreaming for our children. And so a couple of things I want to point out today. First one is this, is know your child. Make sure you take the time to know your child. I'm not going to spend a lot of time on this, but it's probably not the main point, and we've talked about these things in the past. But that passage that says, train up a child in the way that he should go. Well, that means you need to figure out who that child is if you're going to help direct them in the way that they should go. And one of the things certainly would encourage you is to take the time to listen to your child, to understand them. To have conversations with them, along the path of life as we're going about our regular, life duties, kind of things, tasks, that you listen to them. Make sure that you help them discover their talents, the unique way that God's created them and how God wants to use them in their mission in life. We live in a culture where we focus a lot on achievement, and achiever is kind of one of my top strengths. I love to check things off my list, but sometimes we can get too focused on that. It's not about necessarily achieving, having an A report card every time, and achieving all these other things, whether they're related to athletics or being involved in school things. And sometimes we can commend our kids like too much for being kind of overachievers and having a full menu of things that they're doing, and that we can lose sight of the uniqueness of our kids. We can put pressure on them that maybe they don't need. If in middle school, if they're in 6th grade and we're saying, if you don't bring your grades up, you're not going to be able to go to college, that might be putting undue pressure, on a young child. But we live in an achievement-oriented society, and a lot of it is good, but we have to be careful. Because there's a lot of people that don't necessarily fit the mold, a lot of kids that haven't fitted the mold of society. Thomas Edison had 1,093 patents. And he quit school because his dad said he was stupid. And he overheard a teacher that said he was mentally flawed or incapable. So he just quit school. But he still did pretty well. Albert Einstein did not speak until he was 3 years old. Can you imagine that? As a parent, you'd be having a heart attack. He found it nearly impossible to express himself in writing, and he was horrible at math. Steven Spielberg had dyslexia. He was undiagnosed for all of his childhood. His parents divorced when he was high school. He had a hard time finishing things that he didn't enjoy. But he liked making mini-movies. And his mom bought him this camera, which turned out to be a pretty good thing. And he became pretty successful. So my encouragement, make sure you take the time to know your child, to listen to them, and not just be going about the busyness of life. Secondly, I want to talk about understanding the importance of training and discipline. I want to look at a few passages of Scripture here. Most of these are from Proverbs. Solomon, the son of David, wrote most of Proverbs, and so you can get the feel he liked discipline because he wrote a lot about it. Proverbs 13:24. Whoever spares the rod hates their children, but the one who loves their children is careful to discipline them. So it's important to discipline our children, create boundaries for them. A rod and a reprimand impart wisdom, but a child left undisciplined disgraces its mother. I thought it was funny. I copied this directly, is that if you're undisciplined, you become an it instead of he or she, apparently. Probably should be disgraces his or her mother. Okay. Discipline your children, and they will give you peace. They will bring you the delights you desire. And then I love Hebrews 11 through 12. Discipline seems pleasant at the time, but painful. Later on, however, it produces a harvest of righteousness and peace for those who are trained by it. So one of the great responsibilities of parents is to discipline, create boundaries. A lot of times when we think of discipline, we think of punishment, but it's not necessarily punishment. On the front end, it's discipline. It's creating boundaries. It's creating expectations for our children, and sometimes punishment is involved in that. Our goal, essentially, is that our children will come to the place where they are self-disciplined and where they'll have self-control. Self-discipline is doing what we don't feel like doing. That'd be like, if you're trying to, put together a workout plan and get up in the morning, you don't feel like it. Well, that's self-discipline. You go do it anyway when you don't feel like it. Self-control is not doing something that you shouldn't do. Something that's going to get you into trouble. So our discipline and boundaries hopefully will create in our children a sense of self-discipline and self-control in their lives. Now, one of the challenges of a culture in which we live is that we're bent on ensuring that the next generation kind of has a better life. We always want them, it seems like that's part of the American dream, that our kids have a better life. But sometimes we interpret that better life as a life of ease, a life of comfort, a life that is free from disappointments. However, that might not be necessarily the best life for them to grow in character and to develop as individuals. A biblical understanding of the good life is one that provides and exploits opportunities in order to experience and encounter God. And that it might be through difficulty and suffering that we have opportunities to obey and trust God and grow in our faith the most. Pretty soon here we're going to be talking about some Christmas characters, like Mary and Joseph. And, they grew through difficulty in their life. They obviously made an incredible contribution to mankind that we still celebrate today every week when we gather for worship. So in our culture today that emphasizes safety and comfort, we could be tempted, it can be too easy on the discipline side of things. Discipline is a form of love. Sometimes parents equate leniency with love, but in reality, leniency is a very dysfunctional kind of love, not creating boundaries for our kids when they don't have the ability to create them themselves. So in discipline, in creating disciplines and practices in our life, we're trying to create boundaries for our kids, or healthy patterns. And sometimes when we're trying to create patterns in their lives, the first time we do it, or the second time we do it, or the fifth time we do it, can seem like an awkward dance. It feels uncomfortable. And one of the things that we've trained our students that have been part of the Contender Project in, and also our cross-training team, is just kind of the practice of using the Lord's Prayer as a guide for prayer. And when you first do it, particularly if you're doing it one-on-one, it's kind of like this awkward dance, and it feels really uncomfortable. But after you do it a while, it kind of becomes natural, and you kind of get in the flow of things. All disciplines and spiritual practices are like that. They feel weird. If you took a risk and tried to have some really deep conversations around your Thanksgiving table, it seemed awkward probably. My guess is if your family's not used to it, you might have gotten thrown out of the house, for all I know. But eventually, if you do it over and over again, you become more comfortable. It seems like the natural flow of things. Picture two houses separated by a tall grassy field. And there's children from those different houses that rally and play together during the summer months. But in the first months of June, when they're kind of running through the field to connect with each other, the grass is all grown up. And they have to kind of navigate and figure out how they're going to get there. But after a few weeks, there's a path that is worn, and they don't have to think anymore. They just kind of follow the path. Our minds are like that. Spiritual practices are like that. When we do them over and over again, we want to come to the place where we can do them naturally. Someone's aspiring to be a great tennis player. They might, receive, really hard serves over and over again, maybe thousands of times, so through the course of a week, so they can learn to return those, and so that they come to the point where they can do it without even thinking about it. Their body can do it without even thinking about it, because they have to learn to do it really, really fast. And that's kind of a good analogy of what it means to have disciplines or spiritual disciplines in our life, that we can begin to do them and practice them without even thinking about it. So for example, using the Lord's Prayer as an example, how powerful it would be is just, as you're driving your car, you're just going to walk through, the steps of the Lord's Prayer, and you're praying that prayer, in whatever you're doing, working out, or whatever it is that you might be doing, that comes so naturally in your life. That's why we practice things over and over again. We all need disciplines. We all need practices in our lives. And often those disciplines at first, I'm not talking really about punishment here, but those disciplines at first are not only awkward, but they're difficult. And our challenge is to discipline for our kids' benefit. It's not for us, but it's for their benefit and for their advantage. Now, last thing I want to talk about before we close out today is I want you to think about reflecting on the liturgy of your home. This might be the most important thing that I want to talk about. I read a book recently entitled, You Are What You Love. You are what you love. And you worship what you love. You give yourself to what it is that you truly love. So Jesus said to love the Lord your God with all your heart, soul, mind, and strength, and to love your neighbors yourself. And then in the Old Testament, in Deuteronomy 6, when the people of Israel are going into the Promised Land, they're going to be living among all these pagan nations, and God is giving them instructions. How are you going to kind of keep focused on me? Because none of these nations, they knew they lived in a pagan world, and none of these nations served and worshiped God. And God gave them instructions on how to maintain that commitment to Him. And He begins by saying, the Lord our God is one. Love God with all your heart, soul, mind, and strength. And then He says this, these commandments that I give you today are to be upon your hearts. Impress them on your children. Talk about them when you sit at home and when you walk along the road. For us it would be driving somewhere. When you lie down and when you get up. Tie them as symbols on your hands and bind them on your foreheads. Write them on the door frames of your houses and on your gates. What is he talking about there? He's talking about building spiritual practices into our lives. He's talking about the liturgy, which is order, the liturgy of our homes. What is the liturgy of your home and of your family? I grew up with parents who were super committed to God and to the church. And one of the great memories I have, and actually my wife Jane reminded me of this last night when we were talking about the strategy, is that if I were to ever wake up early in the morning, I could hear my parents praying. They'd always start the morning praying. They'd do their devotional, then they'd pray. And I could always hear my parents praying for each one of us, one by one. They'd go through the list. If for some reason we didn't have devotions that night, and we went to bed early, I could hear my parents praying at night. And what an incredible practice, how powerful it is, for a child to hear their parents praying for them, individually, not in a hurry, just one by one, on a regular basis. They never miss, day after day. That's an example of the liturgy, the practice of your home. There can be many components in that. Some of them are pretty simple, praying together, reading God's Word together. As you're driving along, being open and looking for teachable moments to have conversations with your children. And the kind of conversations change, obviously, as your kids get older. But there's a lot of things that make up the liturgy, the practice, the disciplines of our home. In a recent survey, it was found that less than 10% of parents who attend church with their kids read the Bible together, pray together, or participate in an active service together. So I want to encourage you to make that a priority in your home. If you don't do it every day, make sure you don't let that stop you. You're going to kind of pick it up and be committed to that. And again, we know that it's unlikely that the majority of parents have a strategy for the development, for the spiritual development, for sure, of their kids. And so we allow our destiny to be controlled by circumstances or the drift with culture in our world today. Obviously, if our kids are going to experience authentic faith, it most likely begins with us. It's hard to pass on what you've not received. It's hard to teach our kids about risk-taking faith if we're not willing to trust God, if they don't see faith in us on a regular basis. So we know that it begins with us, and that's why I think one of our greatest prayers should be in praying for our kids. God, help me to be a model of growing love for you and for others. Jesus' command to follow him is a command to align our loves and our longings with his, to want what he wants, to desire what God desires, to hunger and thirst after God, to be passionate in our pursuit of him, to pursue the kingdom of God. Augustine, church father, once said this. He wrote, "You have made us for yourself, and our heart is restless until it rests in you." And so essentially what Augustine was saying is that we're drawn to God. There's a vacuum within us that is empty until it is filled with God. And that he's also communicating that we've been made to worship. And in reality, it's not whether we choose to worship or not. We only get to choose what or who we worship. We all have been created to worship in some way, shape, or form. Augustine goes on to say this. He says, "My weight is my love. Wherever I am carried, my love is carrying me." And so as we look at the liturgy of our homes, the practice, the disciplines of our home, it's very likely that they'll point to what the love is that is carrying us and propelling us forward in our lives. Again, every one of us worships. Only the question we have is what or who do we worship? One of the things I think to help us understand the liturgy of our families, we don't usually talk about that, we talk about liturgy in church order, is to talk about the liturgy of the mall. Do you know the mall has a liturgy? Consumerism, in essence, has a liturgy. Some of us don't go to the mall anymore because we can shop, in our pajamas, so we don't have to do that. But the mall has a liturgy. It's kind of a religious site. I don't know if you thought about that as you walk into a mall. It's kind of a religious site. Because it is liturgical in nature. Its spiritual significance isn't found in its ideas or its messages, but in its loves. See, the mall doesn't care. I know the mall's not a person, but the mall doesn't care what you think. In fact, a lot of the messages that are hanging out in the mall are obviously not true. Just because you bought this or you have this cologne doesn't mean you get this hot date automatically. Most of us know that the messages are not true. But it doesn't care what we think. The mall only cares about what you love. And upon approaching most malls, the architecture of the building has a recognizable code. You can go into this massive atrium, there's big windows all around, and even if you're a foreigner to that particular mall, you feel at home, comfortable, because it feels like all the other malls that you've been in, and there's a map, for the new attendees, the new seekers, to help them navigate all the spiritual offerings in the mall and the different places that you can go. And while the daily clock is suspended, I think at the mall you don't find too many clocks around. They don't want you to know what time it is. They want you to spend all day there. Is that there is a liturgical calendar. And in fact, we just celebrated a high day in the liturgical calendar, and that was Black Friday. And now to be followed by Cyber Monday. And then it'll be Christmas, and then shortly after that, Valentine's, and there is a liturgical calendar. And they're always looking to add some more dates because that brings more seekers and more money into the mall. And so what does the mall try to get us to believe or to love? I mean, it tries to get us to believe that our lives are found in the accumulation of things, and with the illusion that we'll be able to enjoy them forever, even though, if we step back and think about it, we know that we can't. So there is a liturgy to the mall, and there's a liturgy to our lives, and our families, and our practices. And one of the reasons we gather for worship is so that God can recalibrate our hearts, so that God can realign our loves, so that God can point us in the right direction, reminding us of what is eternal, what is real. To remind us, as the Apostle Paul says, that it's only the unseen things, that everything that is seen will be gone someday. But it's difficult for us in the world in which we live, and that's why worship becomes really important for us. You see, worship isn't just about us coming and offering something to God, though it is about that, bringing our best to God. But we come with the expectation that God wants to do something in us, that He wants to change us, He wants to transform us, He wants to renew us and give us a picture of what it means to live in the eternal kingdom. So the fast pace of our lives can make it easily possible for us to go through our existence without much reflection and not to think about the liturgy, the practices in our homes, in our families. And we just do things without recognizing that the things we're doing probably are doing something to us. We kind of go along with the fads and the passions of this world. So I just want to encourage you. Take an audit. We should regularly take an audit of our daily routines. The liturgy of our home. What does it tell our kids? What we love. What story is communicated, through the liturgy and practices that we live out? What vision of the good life is carried out in those practices? In your outline, there's a list of an opportunity to create a list of things or practices that are really important, and creating this environment, where kids can thrive, not only become confident and contribute to society, but hopefully, if you're a follower of Christ, you want them to come to the place where they love God. And here's a few. I'll just give you a few quickly. And of course, there's no end probably to this list, not necessarily a top 10 list. But I would say this, that if you're married, love your spouse. That would be the number one thing. Make sure you love one another, because that creates an environment of security and comfort for your kids. There's passages of Scripture that talk about remembering. Make sure you make it a practice of remembering what God has done in your life. That's why a practice of putting a wall together, however you do it, things you're thankful for, is critically important. Remember what God has done in the past, because you might need that to give you traction, for your present time and anything you might face in the future. Model trust in God. What are your family's faith stories? Everybody should have one, or two, or a few. What's your newest faith story, step of risk-taking faith? Obviously praying, reading God's Word together, worshiping together. I think a big one is eating dinner together. Probably one of the practices that Jane and I did when our kids were little. Our kids laugh at us now because we used to eat dinner at 4:30 when they got home from school.